Hello, everybody. Welcome to Cogent Strategic Wealth's Smart Money Habits live stream. Personal finance and money is really a hot topic, and we have so many people in our lives and the media and books and everything that are bringing us so much information. You have to ask, who do I believe and what do I need to know? In today's live stream, we want to share with you ideas around how you can begin to work towards having smart money habits of your own. We want to bring to you some helpful information today by explaining what personal finance is and give you some really practical ideas on how you can better understand the steps you can take to have a better personal financial experience. At the end of today's presentation, we hope you'll feel more confident, more relaxed about your financial future. We'll share some tools with you, even an online course that will be an opportunity for you to even go deeper into this. But we really hope this live stream will be a good investment for you, your time and your energy to watch it, and make you happy that you're not just streaming old recordings of Breaking Bad. So now, a couple of important information things about our live stream. All participants have been muted and your video has been turned off. So if you happen to unmute yourself, please mute it for the sake of the others. If you find your name is visible, you can change it in the Zoom preferences also. Many find it useful to pin the speaker's video on the screen for yourself, and you can do that also by next to the three dots next to your own video. We'd love you to ask questions. Unfortunately, we're not going to have you do it verbally. We're going to ask you to do it through the Zoom chat feature. You can find that chat feature down at the bottom of the screen, and you'll be able to type in your questions there. We'll try to get to all of them today. If we don't, we will respond to you in another way afterwards. And at the end of the live stream, we'll stick around for a while. If you have an extra question that you didn't get to ask along the way, ask it. We'll see if we can address it then. Questions are anonymous, so no one else should be able to see your question when you ask it. So now, I'd like to introduce myself. My name is Michael Evans. I am the founder and wealth advisor for Cogent Strategic Wealth. I'm also known as Samantha, Matthew, and Ryan's dad. I'm joined today by my two colleagues. It's Liz Winkle and Kelly Stanley. Now I'd like to introduce Liz Winkle to you. That's going to be covering our first portion on budgets. Liz is our client relationship specialist, but even more than that, she is a huge St. Louis Cardinal fan and a really good person. So she's going to address now budgeting. Liz?
Okay, thank you, Michael. And thanks everyone for joining and taking time out of your night to talk about personal finance. My name's Liz, and this first section of 3 is going to be talking about budgeting. And if you just graduated college, or even if you're a couple years out, this might be the first time that you've truly had to think about it. So contrary to what you might have heard about budgeting in the past, it's not about restricting your freedom. It's actually about creating it. It's about making sure that you have the resources available to do the things that you want to do in life and to have the things that you need, whether that's day to day or year to year or your major life goals. So one of the biggest mistakes that you can make in your day-to-day personal financial life is just the refusal to pay attention to where you're spending your money. Some people can take the ostrich approach, and that means that they just stick their heads in the sand and pretend like it doesn't exist. That rarely works out in pretty much anything in life, but especially when it comes to your finances. Even really smart and responsible people can fall into this trap on occasion. So why do some people do this? Well, there's a couple of reasons. We've heard before that we just know how much money is coming in. We can ballpark it. Another thing is that, people have never had to think about it before. And I am guilty of this last one. I have said before, things tend to fluctuate. But here's a hint, things are always going to fluctuate. Fluctuations can be accounted for and they can be planned for. Moving on, these are three very powerful words in your personal finance. You need to pay yourself first. Before considering how to spend the money that you're making, take care of yourself. You've worked really hard for that money, so make sure that money is working hard for you too. That's the key to personal financial freedom. And that means savings. So there's a couple things that you're going to need to save for. Number one being an emergency fund. Make sure that you establish a savings equal to about 3 to 6 months worth of expenses and keep that liquid, which means keep that in cash in a bank account, not cash in a sock under your bed. And if you don't have that yet, that's totally fine. Just commit to saving up for that. This can be your oh shoot fund. Maybe you're between jobs and you don't have income for a couple months, or hey, maybe you're in a pandemic and your income has been affected by this. It's not that big trip that you always wanted to take. And that's another really important reason why you need to know what your expenses are. Because if you're saving up for 3 to 6 months worth of spending, you need to know what that dollar amount is. Another thing that you need to save up for is retirement. And I know it sounds crazy, especially if you're younger, and you might not be retiring for 40 or so years, but it's very important to start saving now as early as you can. Kelly's actually going to talk a little bit later about the importance of compounding interest. A general rule of thumb is to set aside about 15 to 20% of your gross income to invest for retirement. That number can vary depending on who you are and what your situation is, but 15 to 20% is a good place to start. So if you're serious about wanting financial freedom in your life, don't compromise on paying yourself first. We have lots of mandatory expenses. We've got rent, electric bills, for some people, Starbucks, but saving for yourself should always be a priority. Don't fit those savings into your leftover dollars. You'll quickly find out that you've already spent them and you don't have any left. So what is the right amount to spend? There's a couple general rules of thumb that we can consider here. The first is get a handle on your big ticket items first, and then you can worry about the smaller stuff later. Your housing costs, that's probably the biggest ticket item that you have. Housing costs should always be less than 25% of your gross income. Your gross income is how much you're making. That's not how much you're taking home. These costs can include, if you're a renter, rent. If you're a homeowner, that would be mortgage, which would be principal plus your interest. Insurance, renter's insurance or homeowner's insurance, real estate taxes, HOA dues, etc. So those housing costs combined with your monthly debt payments, that could be student loans, car loans, credit card debt, all of that should be less than 35% of your monthly gross income. And now we can talk about spending. There's two types of spending. There's two categories. So non-discretionary is the not fun stuff, but the stuff that everyone has to pay for. That's car insurance, your utility bills, your housing costs. But non-discretionary costs, those can still be kept at least reasonable levels, which is going to allow you to live the life that you want to live. Discretionary is the fun stuff. Maybe you're really passionate about charitable giving and there's a cause that you feel great about giving to. It's also entertainment, new clothes, travel, all that good stuff. So if you are at the end of the month and you're having a hard time making ends meet and you're stressed and you need to find areas to cut back in, prioritize how you're spending those discretionary dollars first. So now that we've talked about the discretionary spending, we can talk about treating ourselves. Here's a tip. You can make a list of what truly makes you happy and brings you joy when you're spending money. You can Marie Kondo your financial life. And you might actually be surprised on how that list shakes out. For the discretionary items that fall towards the bottom of the list, consider cutting back on those or just getting rid of some of them altogether. And then we also have one-off expenses as well. There's two types, the ones that we see coming and the ones that we don't. For the ones that we do see coming, for example, you need to get a new car, or you want to go on an annual vacation. Christmas is coming up. Maybe you want to get gifts for your family. You can set a little money aside each month, and that will help smooth costs over time. So it's not such a shock when that purchase hits your credit card or your bank account. For example, we're in a pandemic right now, and I'm not going to the gym. I'm sure a lot of you aren't either. For the last several months, I've been saving up money, and I decided to invest in a bike. It's something that brings me joy, and I was happy to spend the money on it. It was a big expense, but for me, it was worth it. And then the other one is the items that we don't see coming. That could be car repairs or smaller medical costs. Maybe those have ramped up. You need to keep a little bit of a cushion in your monthly budget for those unexpected expenses. Do note, though, that this is different than a true emergency fund. So on the next slide, our friend Manisha talks about applying your hard-earned dollars to bring you joy. And I'll let you read this quote on your own. So the good news is that there's never been more tools available to help you get a clear picture of where your dollars go. On the next slide, we have a couple tools that are popular. Many banks have online banking features that allow you to easily categorize your expenses and run quick reports. Mint.com is a really popular website. I have a lot of friends who use that. We're not here to advocate or endorse one side or the other. I encourage you to check out some of the options that are available to you and see what would be helpful. The idea isn't to get your spending down penny to penny each month the same. What you should do is you should review your spending over the last 12 months or so, and that's going to give you a good idea of where you're at annually and where some fluctuations occur. So here are some key takeaways. Resource allocation. It's all about creating financial freedom for you. It's not about restricting it. Don't be an ostrich. Keep your head out of the sand. Know where your money is going. And always, always pay yourself first. You need to save for the near future and for the long term. And keep big ticket costs down wherever you can. And then lastly, spend on what makes you happy, what truly gives you joy, and then forget all the other stuff. So if you have any questions, just a reminder, please put them in the chat. We'll be monitoring the chat throughout, and we'll address any questions at the end. And now Michael Evans is going to walk us through making some real life financial decisions. Michael, you want to take it away?
Thanks so much, Liz. Nice job. And I really like the part where you talked about looking back over 12 months over your expenses and really taking a look at where you're at. That's such good advice for all of us. So our friend Jedediah Collins, Jed is a former NFL football player. He's a fullback and he's now a financial coach, says that you should think of money as a verb and not as a noun. That's interesting. Seeing money as a verb will give you the perspective that money requires active participation on your part. So why do you think that's important? Well, think of your financial life as a journey. And when you take a journey, you often get in a vehicle and go there. Isn't it so much better that while you're traveling, that you're in control of the vehicle and the vehicle is not in control of you? So think about that in terms of money. As you go through life, you're on a journey and there's a financial journey for you. Wouldn't it be better if you were in control of the money in your life and not have the money control you? So being active, developing smart money habits is a great starting point in your journey. So today we're going to talk about three big topics. Those topics are credit scores, credit cards, and good credit hygiene or habits. We're also going to talk about the difference of how you should look at really big decisions, such as buying or renting a home, leasing or buying a car, and also what questions you should ask around there. After we discuss all of this, we'll have some questions too, but start thinking about a mindset about your money vehicle and where you're going. So let's put a little definitions to these things. What is a credit score? So a credit score is a 3-digit code, and these numbers are generated by credit reporting agencies. They assign them to you based on your credit history that they have with them. The 3 big agencies are Equifax, Experian, and TransUnion. If you use credit, and if you have done that so far, they probably have a record of it and of you. So the businesses you deal with that you get credit from, well, they report to these companies. Now, there's strict guidelines on how and when they can do that, but they do submit your information to the credit bureaus. They decide to do this because it helps them manage risk. They want to know the people that they are giving credit to, are they a good risk? So when you apply for credit, they're going to check your credit score with one or all of these. Now you should ask yourself, how can I check my own score? Isn't it better to be in control than to let others control your destiny, right? So annualcreditreport.com is a website that's mandated by the US government that has the 3 credit reporting agencies making your credit report available. Prior to COVID, you were allowed to check it once a year. Now, because of COVID, you're actually allowed to look at it once a week. So from now through April 21st, you can go to annualcreditreport.com and you can actually check out your own credit history. Now, we're going to ask you to evaluate it when you look at it. Actually go through your credit history and look through it and make sure that the accounts that are on there are actually yours. Check it out and know where you stand. Understanding what your credit score is, how others look at you, really, really is important. Not only does it affect your ability to borrow money, but it affects so many other things. It's important to use the same score also over and over because there's little nuances amongst the different scores. So what you're going to want to do is pick a score, get a game plan, and monitor that score. Actually, maybe set a calendar so you look at it every so often and make sure that it works for you. Now let's talk about what affects your credit score. So the items that really affect your credit score are equal in weighting, but also very large when you look at the credit reporting agencies' algorithms that they'll use. So here's the 2 things that are important. Number 1, paying your bills on time. Credit scores track your record of paying on time every time. So a misstep here and a misstep there can really cause big issues. Even one late payment, where it's over 30 days past due, can stay on your records for years. So that's the first thing that's equally weighted with how much you owe. This is called credit utilization. So the amount of your balance is relative to your credit limits. So it's weighted as almost as heavily as paying on time. So it's a good idea to aggregate all of your ability to spend on credit. So credit scores, mortgage balances, all these other balances that you have and how much they'll lend you. If you add that up, it's really important to keep that amount that you ever use around 30% or lower. That really affects your credit score, and it's much better to keep it lower. Much less weight goes to other things such as credit age. Now, by age, I don't mean yours. I mean the age of the accounts that you have. The longer you have the credit, the longer and higher your credit score will be. Also credit mix. There are different types of credit offered. So there's revolving credit, there's fixed credit, there's credit cards. If you have a mix together, it'll help you out. Also, how recently you applied for credit. So when you apply for a credit card or a loan, all of that does a hard impact upon your credit score. And the more of those you do, it drops down your credit score. So when other creditors look at it, they'll find that they have an issue. So these are all the things that affect your credit score. Now let's talk about what are the actions you can take. Remember driving that vehicle or what it being in control? These are things that you actually can do to have a solid credit score. I say get in the habit of these healthy credit habits or hygienes early in life, because your credit score will follow you through life, much like a tattoo does. And it's hard to get rid of, and it takes a long period of time. So what are some things that you can do to positively affect you? I'd say the first one is use credit lightly. Credit comes in to really focus when you talk about budgeting, what Liz said. Credit should only be used to buy things that you can afford and can pay off. I would also pay all of your bills on time. It's really important to make sure that you prioritize that, even setting up direct payments through your bank. I would also apply for credit sparingly. The credit companies tell us that those hard pings that you do on your credit report actually do have a deleterious effect. And then the other thing you would do, and this might be counterintuitive, but think twice before closing an account. So you get a credit card, you have a pretty good credit history with them, a really good credit history, and then you find a better card. What you might want to do is not close that, because one of the things that affects it is that age of your credit accounts. You might just want to drop down the level of credit that they'll give you. So instead of having $5,000, maybe drop it down to $3,000 or $2,000. So, but what it does is it keeps the date of that credit card start or other credit in the mix. So if you practice these good habits and not overextend yourself, you're going to be able to stay out of what we call the credit trap. And that trap is just so painful. So let's look at how the credit companies report your score. So there are 6 different categories: the bad, poor, fair, good, and excellent. And what they're not showing you here is bankruptcy. So having someone with the higher credit score allows you so much more opportunity in life. So let's look at what happens if you have a poor credit score. The first thing is, if you are able to get credit, they'll charge you a higher interest rate. No one wants to pay more than they have to. So that's very bad for you. Also, you can put money, these are things you can do. You can put money on deposit when you do that. So a low credit score, you can actually fight that by putting money on deposit, getting a credit card, and only using it up to that limit. Another way that you can go is having a cosigner. Now, cosigners are interesting because you're relying on someone else's good credit to bolster and to build your own. So what you want to do is really set expectations when you do that. Make sure you work out with the other person that you're doing this with, whether it's a family member or someone else close to you. Work out how often you're going to pay, how much, what happens if things change, and what happens really if someone is impacted in a bad way and we have to deal with this quickly. The other thing is the poor credit will not allow you to borrow at all, and that has you falling into the credit trap. So there are long-term negative effects that can come from poor credit. It can affect so many other parts of your life. Also, one of the things many people don't realize is that employers look at your credit report. Landlords do also. So many of these things have very long-standing ramifications upon your life. So now getting started, how do you build good credit? So if you wish to build good credit, and you should, there are things you can do to set up a positive credit history. It's important to establish and maintain good credit, and you got to really be careful on how you do it. So the first way was, and I mentioned it earlier, you can apply for a secured credit card. That's a credit card in your name that you put money down and that you actually can spend up to that limit, and it'll help build your credit. Now, remember, if you want a real credit card, you have to be at least 18 years old. If you're under 21, you have to have documented income that you're bringing in. So I would suggest that if you want a real credit card, you should have a job first. You should have the ability to borrow and to pay it back. And having money coming in before it's going out is always a good idea. So the other thing you can do, as I mentioned earlier, that they require you to do is the co-signer. It can blow up relationships, so make sure you have a contract and understanding with that person. Another thing that you can do, but that's not always only when you have bad credit, though. Let me be specific. You can actually get a co-signer when you don't have credit history at all, and someone else can help you build your credit. The other thing you can do is, in that same vein, is become an authorized user on someone else's card. So if you're close to finishing school or you have a job lined up, they do have student credit cards, but make sure that you don't use it before you have the job or you have significant savings to use. There's also a couple of other things that you should think about, and I think it's kind of important to really think about these. Avoid with your first credit card is a high annual fee. Absolutely deleterious to you. High fees usually come with things that most people won't be able to employ in their personal life, such as perks and other things. Keep your fees low. Another thing to do is do not go for a card that has a very low credit dollar amount and interest rate, I should say, a low interest rate, because sometimes those are just teasers and they jump up. If you ever find yourself getting any kind of trouble, you're going to pay an onerous amount of interest. That can be really poor for your long-term financial health. And then I think the last thing is to look out for is cash advances. Cash advances are different than taking purchases within a credit card. Cash advances cause you to, number one, start paying interest the day you do it. Number two, there is not a 30-day grace period like there are on purchases. So you have to pay it back as soon as possible to avoid those charges. The other thing you really want to do is to avoid the late payments. Sometimes when cards have lower interest rates, they will jump up really high once you start missing payments. So you should avoid all of those. So now what are some proactive steps that you can do? Let's recap these. So keep your accounts open as long as possible. Check your credit report annually. Make payments on time, always important to do. That's one of the biggest things when you check your credit report that you'll see that they highlight on there because it is just so important for the creditors. Don't utilize all your credit, keep it around that 30% level or maybe less. And also don't open too many accounts at once. Just some good hygiene to manage your credit life. So now let's talk about big decisions. There's a couple big decisions that you might be confronted with soon. Things that you can think about, like buying a car, or maybe renting's good, but you'd rather have a condo or a house. I think there's things you should ask yourself first before you make the decision to do that. I'd first ask, why am I doing this? Who am I doing it for? Is it for me? Is it for others? Or what are the pros and cons of my other options? And then I think it's important also to think about, will you regret it if you do it, or even if you don't do it? So think this out, talk to friends, possibly a financial advisor or someone in your family that has good money habits already. I would do that. And the last thing you should think about is, God forbid, what is the worst case outcome if you do make the move? What if big things happen to you and maybe your decision doesn't turn out the way you want it to? Understand first what those things are and agree with yourself that you're able to persevere through those, even if they happen. So now let's talk about buying or leasing a car. First, ask, do I need a car? Are there other alternatives available to me? Of course, that matters where you live and all for public transportation. It'd be easy for me to tell you that you should take the bus or the train or ride the bike or even keep the junker for another 147,000 miles. But that's not realistic. And besides, I don't think any of you are going to listen to me anyways when I tell you to keep the car for another 147,000 miles. So since you're going to buy a new car anyways, let's talk about, should you buy or lease a car? So let's take an example of buying a car. Let's say the sticker price is about $34,000. You have decent credit, but not really well established. So they're going to loan you a 4-year loan at 7%. And they're going to ask you to put down a down payment of 20%. So on a $34,000 car, the down payment alone is $6,800 before taxes. So your payment for that car for 4 years will cost you $650 a month. However, if you were to lease it, and instead all you would pay is a one-time refundable security deposit, and also your payment would be about $450 right now for that same vehicle. So think about it. Leasing would save you $200 a month, and you would only pay $450 down, not that $6,800. And by the way, we're ignoring sales tax on this, depending on where you live. But so this is why leasing is so popular: less down and less a month. What's interesting about it, though, is that economically it works if you're going to do 4 years or less and your terms are favorable. So if you have good credit. If you're going to do 4 years or more, or you buy a good used car, it makes sense to buy. So now, economically speaking, buying a car consists of 3 parts: equity, depreciation, and interest. If you finance the purchase of a car, you pay for all 3. If you lease a car, what does that mean? That means you're just renting it from the company that owns it, and you have to return it to them. So think about that. So when you're making decisions around buying or leasing a car, understand that the agreement is finite with leasing, and you own the car for as long as you do when you buy it, and that there are many other expenses that you'll have. In both cases, you will still have to pay for insurance and some repairs. So just a little bit of idea around how to judge, should I buy or should I lease? Another really big decision is, I love where I rent, but I want to buy a house. I want my own place. I'm thinking of making some changes in my life, and I really would like to have my own place. So we often hear, why should I pay rent? It's throwing money out of the window, when I can buy a house and pay towards a mortgage and build equity. I think that's very important. I think one thing people discount is there are so many more things that you're paying for when you buy than when you rent. So there are things that are included, such as mortgage payment, HOA and condo fees, maintenance costs that come up unexpectedly. So going back to Liz's budgeting, you have to have a good reserve fund already built up when buying. You don't have to do that when renting, right? And with renting, you pick up the phone, you call the landlord, and you get something fixed. There's also property taxes due, and those are very volatile and variable. And then homeowners insurance and other things. So again, when you're contemplating buying a home, think through it thoroughly. Make sure that you're going to stay in that house for somewhere at least 70 years, and some people can argue 10 years to make it worth your while. Also, take a look at yourself. Remember those big discussions that you should have before you make this? But look at yourself and say, is this the most important purchase I could make right now? Do I want to go back to school and invest in myself? Investing in your human capital is probably the best investment you can make. So think about that. Also, the company that I work for, do they love me enough that I'll stick around for at least 5 years or so? Do I have that visibility? Many of you might not even know that, even though you've been working for a firm. So the next time you have a review, I suggest you should ask. Another thing you should think about when you buy a home is just the overall dollars that it takes to manage that home versus trade off with other things that you might have. So pre-qualifying for a mortgage is wonderful, but that only tells you about the mortgage payment and some of your other credit. You're really going to want to look deep inside of yourself and say, do I want to start a family? And if I am starting a family, is it the right time to buy, or should we build up more of a reserve fund because the expenses around that is so much? Do I want to take off of work and actually go back and invest in myself? Those are all good decisions and questions to ask yourself that'll lead to good and very healthy habits. So big decisions need to be thought out really well. You really need to have someone else that you can talk to about these things. So I'm biased. I'm a financial advisor. I do this every day for our clients and many times for friends when they call and family. But you should have someone else that you can run these things by, someone objective and someone who's actually willing to tell you something that you might not want to hear. So now I'd like to open it up to questions if anybody has anything. Liz, are there any questions that have come through that they'd like us to address?
No questions yet, but we can address questions at the end after Kelly's.
Outstanding. So I really hope that was helpful for you to know a little bit more about your credit score, credit history, and how to get credit. And then how to kind of frame things in your mind when you make big decisions and know what some of the options are. So now let's take another dive into financial habits with Kelly Stanley. Kelly?
Thank you, Michael. And we're going to wrap it up today talking about one of my favorite topics, which is retirement savings. And as Liz mentioned in the beginning, you know, when you're in your early 20s, maybe early 30s, saving for retirement is probably one of the last things on your mind because it's such a something so far out in the future. And as we meet with, you know, clients, we've never had anybody come say to us, man, I'm really upset I started saving so early in my life. But rather we hear, I really wish I would have started sooner. So today we're going to cover some of the things to be thinking about as you move forward with your own careers and how to make the most out of what you're earning. So what we're going to cover today are a number of topics as it relates to retirement savings. So we'll talk about the differences between Roth and pre-tax savings vehicles. And then we'll also cover other common retirement plan types. We're going to talk about the phenomenon of compound interest, questions that you should be asking your employer, and then lastly, some tips to make sure that you are setting yourself up for a successful retirement. So the first topic we're going to cover here is the difference between Roth and pre-tax contributions. So the main difference between these two types of contributions is that when you make a Roth contribution, so typically when it comes to retirement savings, you can choose to put money away once you've already paid taxes on it, and that's the Roth option, or you can put money away on a pre-tax basis, meaning you have your gross income, you defer money from your paycheck into a retirement savings vehicle, and you don't pay taxes on that income today. But the government will want the tax dollars eventually, and you'll have to pay that later in life when you start to take money out of your account. Versus with the Roth contributions, you would put money in on an after-tax basis today, and then that money continues to grow tax-free. And when you get to retirement age, you can take it out without paying any additional taxes on it. So it's a really huge benefit to consider, especially if you happen to be in one of the lower tax brackets. So for example, you know, if you're in the 12% tax bracket or below, this is an awesome opportunity to, you know, put away money that you've already paid taxes on, and then that money will continue to compound and grow over time, and then you'll have a tax-free bucket of money to pull from in retirement. If you're in a higher income tax bracket, it makes typically more sense to put money away on a pre-tax basis because you want to defer the taxes that would be owed until a later point in time when typically you might be in a lower tax bracket. So those are the two main types of contributions that you can be making. Now I want to talk a little bit about the different types of retirement plans. So when you are, if you are working for an employer, you may be familiar with what's called a 401k plan, a 403b plan, or possibly a 457 plan, or maybe even a simple IRA. A 401k, a 403b, and a 457 plan are all very similar in how they operate. They're just named differently because they refer to different parts of the tax code. The big difference between the 401k and the 403b is that you'll typically come across a 401k if you're working for a corporation, whereas a 403b is more common in nonprofit organizations or hospitals. If you're a teacher, those types of organizations is where you'll see a 403B. And then 457 plans are much more common in, I've seen them with police departments and fire departments. So they all allow you to put away the max amount, which is $19,500 for 2020, and that's going to remain the same for 2021, out of your paycheck. So again, those plans may offer you the ability to put money in either pre-tax or post, and the post being the Roth contributions. Every plan is different, so you would have to understand what your employer offers. But again, understanding where you are with your income level and the tax brackets, that really should determine which type of contribution you should be making. And then simple IRAs may be more common in small business situations. So if you're working for a small company, if there's only a few employees, they may not have set up any sort of retirement, a 401k type plan, but they may offer you a simple IRA. And again, it just gives you the ability to put money away pre-tax, most likely, and you can put up to $13,500 in that type of an account in 2020. And then lastly, if you happen to be self-employed, so you're an entrepreneur and you are making a good amount of income, and you want to be able to set aside funds for your future, but also on a pre-tax basis, you can contribute to what's called a SEP IRA. So it stands for self-employed pension. And in 2020, you can put up to 25%, the lesser of 25% of your income, or $57,000. So again, it allows you in some situations, depending on your income, to put far more away than what you would in a typical 401k plan. But again, it's all very income dependent on how much you're making. But that may change throughout your lifetime too. There may be, if you're an independent contractor and you receive a 1099, this is a perfect example of somebody who can put money away in a self-employed pension plan. So those are all different types of plans that you may come across throughout your career. So it's good to understand what the differences are. Now we're going to talk about one of my favorite topics, because it is such a powerful concept, and it's so important to truly understand why it is so beneficial to start saving as early as you possibly can in your careers. So compound interest, this is an Albert Einstein quote. He said, "Compound interest is the eighth wonder of the world. He who understands it earns it, and he who doesn't pays it." So simply, compound interest is when you earn interest, not only on the principal amount of the contributions you're making, but also the accumulated interest that you're earning from whatever you're invested in from previous periods. So again, we're going to look at an example of why this is such a powerful concept. So here we have two individuals, Susan and Marvin. And you can see here that Susan is 19 and Marvin is 28. And they have both decided to start saving $5,000 a year out of their income. And Susan is only going to contribute for 10 years. So she starts at 19, she's done contributing, by the time she's 29, versus Marvin, who is going to start at 28 and continue up until he's in his 60s. Now, what you'll see here is that assuming an average rate of return of 7.5%, and assuming they kept their money invested throughout this entire time frame, Susan has saved just $50,000 of her own money, is what she has put into an account. Marvin has put away $180,000 over this time frame. And you can see that Susan ends up with nearly $157,000 more in total value over that time frame. And that is simply because she started saving at only 10 years earlier than Marvin. But those 10 years early on in life are really crucial. And if you already happen to be in your 30s and you haven't started saving yet, no need to panic. You still have plenty of time ahead of you. But the point being, if as soon as you have an income stream coming in, we would suggest you start to put money away, even if it's a small amount to start with. The earlier you start saving, the better off you're going to be in the long run, assuming you continue to keep that money invested over time. So that is why compound interest is so very powerful. Now, when you are gainfully employed, you'll want to understand what retirement saving vehicles you have available to you to invest in, and you'll also want to understand how those plans work, because every employer has the ability to set up different plan structures, and they can set it up in a way that differs from one employer to the next. So you want to ask a number of important questions. So the first question to ask is, when can I start contributing? Now, some employers will allow you to start contributing right off the bat. So you become employed, and then very next day you can sign up for their 401k plan and start contributing with your very first paycheck. Unfortunately, not every employer does that, and we've seen some that you have to wait a full year before you can start contributing. Some you have to wait 6 months. So you just want to understand when you when you receive that job offer, or if you're already employed, just go and ask your employer if they have a plan. If they haven't mentioned it yet, maybe you just missed it in the orientation meeting, and find out when you can start contributing to it. Secondly, it's important to understand if the employer puts any money into the plan on your behalf, and if so, how much. So typically what we've seen is many employers on average will match about 3% of your income. And we've seen some in the past, not so much in recent years, but I've seen some plans that have contributed as much as 10%. They've matched up to 10% of their employees' contributions, which is very generous. And again, not something we've seen very frequently. 3% is typically the average that we come across. So it's important to understand that if you contribute to a plan with your employer and they are offering what they call a match on top of that, it's essentially free money that they're giving to you that you can only take advantage of if you participate yourself. So it's a win-win situation. Now, some employers will institute what they call a vesting schedule on the contributions that they make on your behalf. So there may be a period of 2 to 5 years where you become a little bit more vested each year, so that, let's say you've been with an employer 3 years, but they have a 5-year vesting schedule, and then you decide to leave that employer, then you may be only entitled to about 60% of what they've put in on your behalf. However, it is important to note that any money that you put into the plan out of your own paychecks is yours regardless. So you will always get that money back that can be rolled into another type of retirement vehicle should you lose that, should you leave that employer. Now, it's also important to understand if there's anything in particular you have to do to get the employer contribution. So in some cases, you actually have to be contributing to the plan and making contributions in order to get the match. And in some situations, they may make a contribution on your behalf, even if you're not participating. Like I said, every employer is different, so it's really important to understand how that particular plan is structured. Another common feature that we've seen in recent years that plan sponsors have been initiating is something called an auto enrollment or auto escalate feature. So it's very possible that you begin working for an employer and you automatically get enrolled into their 401k plan. They don't even give you the choice. They just go ahead and automatically enroll you, which we love because it gets you starting to save right off the bat. And like we said, then you can benefit from all that compound interest over time. But not every plan does that. So you usually have to actually opt in to participate in the plan itself. But if they offer an auto escalate feature, what this means is you will decide initially how much to contribute into the plan. And as Liz mentioned in the beginning today, we recommend trying to contribute about 15 to 20% of your gross income. However, we understand that may be difficult for some people to do right off the bat. So it's a process where we may have to continue to increase that percentage year after year. With an auto escalate feature that may be done for you on your behalf. And then lastly, how often can I adjust my contributions? In most cases, you can adjust it pretty much at any time throughout the year, but some plan providers may have some restrictions. Now, you may be wondering what this colorful chart is here, but essentially what this represents is the important concept of diversification. So when it comes to actually choosing what to invest in within your retirement plans, you'll want to make sure that you have a broadly diversified portfolio and that your money is not just sitting in a fixed income fund, or it's not 100% in large cap, the S&P 500, because you want to have your money invested in all different types of asset classes. And the nice thing is that many 401k plans and other retirement plans give you the option of pre-built portfolios. So they may already be well diversified, and you just have to choose a portfolio that's suitable for your risk level. Or they may have what's called target date funds, which essentially ties the overall portfolio diversification to your projected retirement date. And then it will continue to get less and less risky over time as you get closer to retirement. So just a reminder, you don't want to have all your eggs in one basket. You want to make sure you have your hard-earned money diversified throughout all different types of asset classes. And a couple of things to consider in order to set yourself up for success going forward is, one, to understand that with investing comes risk. So I don't know how close attention you've been paying to the financial markets this year, but it's been a great example of the volatility that can occur throughout your investing lifetime. And the great thing is, if you're in your 20s or 30s, you still have a very, very long time frame ahead of you, and you can withstand the roller coaster ride, as we like to call it, that you may endure as you are an investor, because it's completely normal, and markets will go up and they'll go down. But eventually, if you start from here, you're going to end up at a much higher amount down the road when you stay in the market and stay invested, because you're contributing and you're benefiting from compound interest, even when the markets go down periodically, which they did earlier this year, and then they've bounced back fairly quickly. But it is very normal to have periods of time where you see market fluctuations going up and down, and we advise staying put. Don't make any rash decisions, because like I said, this is money for retirement. You can't really do anything with it without penalty at this point in the game. So just let it sit and do its thing and continue to contribute to your plans over time. Along with that is the recommendation to ignore the noise. And what we mean by that is the continual stream of talking heads that you may see on CNBC or CNN, or the headlines in the newspaper, on social media, all with the pure intention of making you fearful of what's happening in the markets. It doesn't benefit you, and if you pay attention to all of that, you're going to drive yourself nuts, because you're going to be continually questioning what the right thing to do is. And like we said, it's usually best just to stay the course, let it ride itself out, and over the long run, you will benefit from saving early on. As Liz mentioned earlier, make it a priority. So paying yourself first is so critical. And we obviously are huge proponents of starting to save for retirement as early as you possibly can. And understand that life will happen and things will come up, and you may need to adjust your savings level over time. But the most important thing is just to continue to save. So even if income levels change, or your obligations go up and you have to dial back what you're putting in, just try to continue to put something away in versus completely stopping altogether. And then lastly, leverage an advisor. So there are so many different types of financial advisors and specialists out there to help people in all stages of their lifetimes and asset levels. And we are always here to answer questions. Even if we're not the right fit to work with somebody, we will always make sure they are pointed in the right direction, because we do feel so strongly in the benefit of getting some solid advice from a fee-only financial advisor.
That was just great. Thank you so much for that. I was thinking back about your example about Susan, and I think it was Marvin, how Marvin got a late start. Think about if Susan kept contributing for the other years that she did, and just how much she had and how different her life would be later on. I actually know Susan, and she did that. She just didn't tell you when you made up that formula. This is great. Really appreciate everybody spending time to come together with us to discuss smart money habits. We really appreciate your investment, and we want to let you know that we're with you and we want to help you. And there's actually a lot of good information out there. So here's how we're going to follow up and what you can expect. The first thing is we're going to send you out a couple of emails. They'll have some articles. They'll have that link to check your credit score. We'll also send out an email with a link to this recording that we're making here of Smart Money Habits with Cogent. Feel free to share it around with friends. We'd like it to go viral and just have big followers. No, I'm just kidding. But share with your friends. And we're really, really happy that you invested the time in this and didn't just sit around and watch Westworld today. So thank you for that. We would also like to allow a little more education for you. So I mentioned earlier Jedediah Collins. Jedediah actually has created an online learning platform that I think is pretty darn good at continuing your education. I spoke to Jedediah earlier, and he has actually offered a $20 savings on the Your Money Vehicle Learning course. It's regularly $99, but there's a nearly 20% discount here. Feel free. We're going to send you this link out too, but you should take it. I think it's a good investment. It'll probably take you 10 minutes over 30 days or 10 days of 30 minutes. And it'll really up your acumen and really help you out on how to use money and how to think about it even further than we discussed today. So now we'd love you to stick around, but we understand we've taken just about an hour of your time. So if anybody has any questions, please place it into chat now, or feel free to follow up with any questions that you have in the emails that we're going to send to you later on. You can always do that, and we'd be happy to help you out. Liz?
Yeah, we've had a couple questions come through. So if you want to stick around, please do. And we'll address one or two of those. I know we're getting close to an hour here. So Michael, the first question is actually for you. What do I do if I have too much credit card debt?
That's such a great thing. It's a bad place to be. The first thing I would say is don't do it. So if you exercise those smart money habits that we talked about and have good credit hygiene, you shouldn't put yourself in that position. But let's say you do. There's a bunch of things you can do. And number one is educate yourself. Educate yourself so much. So make sure you know where your debts are, how much you owe, what the interest rate is, what the payback time is, how little or more you can make, and what happens if you don't make a full payment or a partial. What happens to the interest rate then? The second thing you can do is you can actually get help. If your credit score is still good, believe it or not, one of the techniques that people do is they go find a credit card that has a lower introductory rate, and then they'll pay off the higher rate credit cards or credit debt. Now, that juggling can get a little dangerous for you, as you can understand. So some things you might have to do is get a second job, place all of your newfound earnings from that second position and put it towards your credit. The other thing that Liz talked about earlier, look at your discretionary spending and cut things down very, very deep, and apply all of those extra resources towards that. And you can also always go and ask for help from others. That's another thing you can do. And again, that's a difficult thing to do. I got to tell you, actually, when I was in college, I had to do that. And it taught me a lesson. Very cheaply did it teach me a lesson, but I borrowed money from a family member, and it was, at the right time, and I paid it back, and I never let that happen to myself again. So it was a cheap lesson for me to learn, and then to be able to help you today. And I think the final thing you can do, and I know Liz talked about a reserve fund, but one of the things you could do to keep your credit score is just drain your bank account and start to pay off and prioritize your highest costing credit liabilities that you have. So seek out help, talk about it, look online, and also maybe talk to your financial advisor that already helped you. So I hope that's helpful.
Great. Okay, we've got a couple more questions coming through, but we'll just address one more and then we'll follow up with you individually since we're buttoned up against an hour here. Kelly, this one's for you. If I have student loans or credit card debt to repay, how should I balance those obligations with trying to save for retirement?
Is a great question, and something we see a lot of when folks are just coming out of school and they may have some student loans already accumulated that they need to pay back, but they also want to balance that with trying to save for retirement. And I suggest looking, as Michael mentioned, understanding, if you have debt outstanding, what is the amounts and the interest rates that are tied to those various debts, because sometimes student loans can have a fairly low interest rate versus credit card debt may be a much higher interest rate that needs to be addressed. And when you have an interest rate of some sort of liability that's above, let's say 7 or 8%, it may make more sense to attack that piece of debt first before saving for retirement, because essentially when you pay down those debts, you're essentially earning that rate of return, whatever that interest rate is, you're earning that as a rate of return on your dollars to begin with. If you have interest or debt outstanding that's a lower interest rate, then I would suggest just trying to balance out and still contribute to a retirement account, but perhaps you have to start at a smaller amount to begin with until you get those other debts paid off. But again, if it's a student loan debt, those are most likely longer term in nature. So I would just, build a plan to contribute to a retirement savings account anyway. And then perhaps once that debt is paid off, you can boost up your savings even more.
Wonderful. Thank you. I'd like to thank Kelly and Liz for both your insights and your own personal experience and sharing that with us. Thank you so much for that. And I'd like to thank everybody else. I think it's one of the biggest investments you can make in yourself is to better understand your own choices, your own financial decisions. And actually, as Jedediah taught us, driving the vehicle yourself is much easier than letting others. So thank you for this. Thanks for your investment. And we will talk to you soon.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.